Welcome to Financial Clarity, the podcast dedicated to helping service-based small business owners achieve financial success. Join us as we demystify financial concepts, get practical tips from seasoned entrepreneurs, and discover strategies to increase profit and value. Hannah Smolinski here. I'm the host of the Financial Clarity podcast, where I connect successful entrepreneurs, financial experts, and leaders in the small business community. Past guests include Greg Crabtree, the author of Simple Numbers, Straight Talk, Big Profits, which is the number one book I recommend for small business owners when they want to learn how to run a more profitable business. And Melina Palmer, a behavioral economist who is the host of the Brainy Business podcast, who talked to me about her new book, The Truth About Pricing. So if either of those episodes sound interesting, please make sure to go back and find those on your favorite podcast app. Today's episode is brought to you by my company, Clara CFO Group. Clara CFO is dedicated to providing financial clarity and profit maximizing solutions to small businesses. The team at Clara CFO are seasoned accounting professionals with a heart for small business. We help growth-minded entrepreneurs thrive through fractional CFO services and financial education. To learn more about Clara CFO Group and how we can help your business, visit claracfo.com. I was introduced to today's guest through Dr. Jeremy Wise of Rise 25. The team at Rise 25 produces this podcast, and we could not be more grateful for them putting in all the hard work of actually getting these recordings out into the world, and then also caring enough about the success of this podcast to actually make great introductions like today's guest. So to learn more about Rise 25, go to rise25.com. So today's guest is Chris Mursau. Chris is the president of Topgrading, Inc., a business dedicated to helping companies identify and hire top performers. Chris has conducted over 3,500 in-depth top grading assessments for internal and external candidates and helped a vast array of organizations pack their teams with A players. Chris's client list is broad and diverse, including Fortune 500 companies, small and medium-sized businesses, and nonprofit organizations. On top of all that, he's also the co-author of the book, Foolproof Hiring, which we have here. And I'm looking forward to discussing that with you today. Chris, thank you so much for being on the Financial Clarity podcast.
Hey, my pleasure, Hannah. Thanks for having me.
Well, I am very happy to have you here because we have basically the audience of this podcast is service-based businesses. And so our people are super important, and hiring the right people coming into our businesses is super important. But I would like to know, and I'm super excited today to talk about top grading because also people may have heard of that subject before and maybe have never even heard the word. So I would first like to know, though, how you got into this top grading world. How did you, back in the early 2000s, you started working with top grading, but why was that something that you were interested in?
And so, Hannah, when I ran across top grading, it really connected two things I was interested in. One was psychology. And so I've got an undergrad degree in psychology, but toward the end of that, you're thinking, hey, what am I going to do with this? And, being a therapist was certainly a consideration, but, that usually necessitates getting a PhD. And that wasn't, quite appealing to me at the time. And also, I was really interested in business. And so I had a minor in business and took some business classes in undergrad. And then went on to get an MBA right after. So those are kind of my two interests. And top grading is really the intersection of those two things, with psychology and business. And so that's where the initial interest came from and how I got connected with top grading.
I love that. So can you explain top grading to anybody who's never heard of it?
Sure. And so top grading starts with really setting the appropriate goal. And the goal for our clients is to eventually fill nearly every position in their company with an A player. Mm-hmm. And so that term A player is bandied about and means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. For us and our clients, an A player is a high performer who exhibits your core values and is a real good culture fit. So kind of a good member of the team who also performs. And so that's the starting point. That's sort of the starting point and underlying foundation of top grading is that the idea of A players. And then top grading is also working really hard to fill all those positions with A players. And we are most well known for really our hiring methodology.
Mm,
And once clients get good at the hiring, they can also use very similar techniques to, assess and coach and develop their internal people, both individual contributors and managers. And also, part of getting hiring right is really clearly defining a player for that role.
mm,
And so when we call it a job scorecard, and so when you create that job scorecard that defines a player for that specific role, it's also a very valuable onboarding document and also very valuable in terms of performance management. We tell clients is when you do a good job scorecard to get the hire right, the performance appraisal should be a direct copy and paste.
mm.
Maybe not all of the content that's on the job scorecard, but you should not need to create any new content for your performance appraisal. So it really that concept of a player really follows throughout an employee's career path in any organization.
Okay. I have a lot of questions and follow-ups on this. The So first of all, I like that you say an A player for that role,
Mhm.
for that job. Because I think that when people hear A players, they might just immediately sort of block off and say like, "Oh, I can't afford like the top talent of all these things. I can't, maybe do that." But, you have different roles in the company, and some of them are going to be, lower level roles, entry level roles, and some of them are going to be more, maybe like higher level management, whatnot. How do people assess like how do they know that they're hiring top talent for that role if it's maybe entry level or something like that?
Well, and it really goes back to that job scorecard.
Mm,
You think of the job scorecard being the operational definition of a player for that role. And so it's important to, talk about and decide what is high performance.
mm,
Another way to think about that is, if at the end of that new hire's first year, we are really, really happy with their performance, what results would they have to deliver? What targets would they have to hit? What would the metrics need to be for us to say we are really happy with their performance? And so that then, is a bit of a circular definition of all right, who is in the top 10%? That's another way to think about a player, someone who is in the top 10% of talent available for the pay in that type of a role. And so, right, making a kind of a stereotypic uh, analogy, yeah, maybe a tiny startup software company that has a relatively simple product doesn't need to develop the same kind of developers that maybe Google needs to hire, in their AI group. And so we need to be thinking about that, the engineer in Google's AI group, if they even have an AI group. I'm thinking like, what are some of the hot positions right now? You know, they may get paid twice or three times what they would get paid at that small. And so the expectations for performance would be different, kind of course, when the compensation is that different. So that's important. And getting compensation right is important.
mm.
You need to be competitive. We're not saying you need to pay at the top of the pay scale, but it also sometimes may be worth paying a little bit more for that A player, because A players tend to produce a lot more
Yeah.
than the Bs and the Cs. So, and Hannah, would you remind me what was the question? I may have talked around that just a little bit.
I think we were just talking about the between how do we find those top players for the role that and I
Right.
think you've nailed it.
I think another important thing to kind of remember and consider is who in most businesses or many businesses, who has the most contact with your clients or your customers?
Mm,
It's usually, your frontline. You're thinking of a retail store. We've had grocery clients. We don't have any right now, but we certainly have in the past. And they knew that the person that had the most contact with their customers were the cashiers.
yeah.
Most of the time, you don't talk to anyone other than the cashier. Don't interact with anyone in the grocery store other than the cashier. Cashiers were on the low end of the pay scale throughout the store. and they still had to get A players in those roles, or they'd risk losing customers.
Yeah.
So we need to be thinking about that. It's A player at every level. And, we kind of look at things in two different directions. One is, kind of thinking about the management team. Um, we like to say that everyone deserves to work for a great manager. And there's also something really important to remember, and that is A players don't want to work for non-A's. And
Yeah.
so your management team is important. You need A player managers, to lead and develop and coach your individual contributors. And also looking at it in the other direction, those A player managers really deserve to have a strong team to lead.
Yeah.
And so kind of that's where top grading comes in. There's an abbreviated or a little shorter version of top grading for the front line. And so we adjust that way. But, A players in every position in the company is, something that most of our clients strive for.
One thing that I thought was kind of interesting in the book was that you mentioned that not all A players are actually suited for management. They may not necessarily be going into management. So I think that's also kind of an interesting thing. And why not? You would think that if an A player, they're going to be looking maybe also for that like next level in their career. But maybe can you explain or maybe tell a story where you've seen that it's better for the A player to kind of stay in a role?
Sure, and you're right. There are a lot of A players who have career aspirations, to move up and get more responsibility and manage if they're not managing at this point. And there are also people who love doing the work and are really good at it, and they fit your culture really well and exhibit your core values. Very often, like maybe an engineer or an accountant, they love working with the numbers. And all of those other kind of professional roles that you can think of. And they don't want to manage people,
Mm,
and or they may not be very good at it if you were to give them those responsibilities. And so what we recommend our clients to do is actually break that A player category into three different groups.
mm.
So, and we just number them: A1, A2, and A3. So A3 are those people that we're talking about. They're a great fit for the role they're in today. You don't want to lose them. Like, you never want them to leave. You always want them to be in that role doing the job that they're doing with the enthusiasm that they have and such, but they're not promotable. And that's
Mhm.
okay. Every company has and needs people like that. And that's okay. We need to make them feel very valuable, because, in fact, they are just as valuable as the A2s and the A1s. A2s are those who have the potential to move up one level. So maybe individual contributor to that first level manager, or manager to director, whatever it may be. And then you have your A1s. Now, the A1s are the most commonly thought of kind of person when you say A player,
Yeah.
next CEO or the next CFO. And if you're growing, you need some of those too, but not everyone you hire can or should be an A1.
Yeah. There's
If you
not
do
enough
that, if
room.
you right, that's right. There's only so many of those top spots.
Right.
So yes, you need some, so you don't have to constantly be hiring managers from the outside. That's tough on the culture too. If you're constantly hiring your leaders from the outside, it's a little more risky and a little more challenging to have a consistent culture. Um, but you also need to hire some A3s. If you
Yeah.
don't hire A3s, and you don't keep your A3s happy, and you don't make your A3s feel very appreciated and valued, it's just going to be kind of a political fight, which is also hard on the culture. Every time a position opens up, you're going to have a lot of people, maybe legitimately a lot of people who could move up, but only one can. And then maybe you're going to lose your A1s and A2s if you have too many of them. So,
Yeah.
you need to think, it doesn't have to be, you don't have to get those percentages precise, but you need to be thinking about, do we and should we try to place an A1 or an A2 into this open role? Or is it better suited for an A3? And be thinking about that before you make the hiring decision.
And you think that it's you can identify if somebody has those A1 or A2 qualities before even bringing them on.
And it's that's you can miss on that. You can
Yeah.
certainly miss on that. But what are some of the indications that someone has the potential to move up? One of them is that there's some evidence, and you can get this from the top grading interview.
Mhm.
One of the real key components of our hiring process. You can see, do they have a pattern of success in new first-time situations. You know, can they figure it out quickly? So if anyone's read Top Grading, resourcefulness is a very important competency and one that we often see exhibited in A players at every level. Um, do they have that resourcefulness? Are they adaptable? Can they figure it out? And are they successful in new first-time situations? That would indicate that they would also be relatively successful or have the potential to be successful in this new position, whether it may be manager or director or executive.
Mm. Okay. I definitely want to talk about the interview process, but I'm going to save that question
Okay.
for a little bit later because I think there's a lot of meat in there. Um, I'm curious about how the approach, if a company is like, "Hey, I've read Top Grading, or I've started learning about this process, and I want to start implementing, or I'm working on it," or maybe they're hiring your company to come in and help them implement. Um, is it more focused first on new hires coming in, or do you start first with the existing team that you have and identify A versus B, C? Or is it tandem? Do you do it, at the same time? I'm curious about that.
You could certainly do it at the same time. And if you're not going to do that at the same time, we'd recommend starting with hiring
Okay.
and getting good at hiring, kind of getting hiring right first. And the reason is, let's say we go the other direction and, say, all right, our goal is we are going to identify the A's and B's and C's, and we're going to replace the C's. That's the first thing we're going to do. Now, if you have a hiring success rate that we have found typical, like pre-top grading for companies not using our processes and methodology, uh, about 25% hiring success. And for us, hiring success is getting an A player in the role. So you only have a 1 in 4 chance of replacing that C player with an A player.
Mm,
You have, you're going to have a lot of churn potentially until you eventually get an A player in that role. That's why we say, really, your focus needs to be, at least one of them needs to be getting hiring right. So when you are replacing people, you're pretty confident that you're going to replace that person with, you're going to upgrade and top grade. That's actually where top grade came from. You're
okay.
thinking about the title for the book, or Brad was the founder of Top Grading. Was thinking of a title for his third book and was thinking upgrading, and thought, what? Because if you go from a 1C player and you replace that person with a B player, that's an upgrade. It's not quite what we're talking about here, and that's where top grading came from.
Gotcha. I am glad
And
you
so,
explained that because I have never really fully connected with it, but now I have. Okay. Wonderful.
yeah, play on upgrade, and so yeah, hiring, first. And as you're working on the hiring, you can certainly do some talent reviews to get a clearer view on, who maybe the A1s, A2s, and A3s are, who those B players are who have the potential to move into A. There are some B players who are, they're just okay. And and so they don't have the potential to become an A. And then who are the C players who, will probably need to be replaced at some point. There's also a really important reason to do that, and that is going back to the A players don't want to work for non-A's.
Yeah.
You need to feel for the percentage of A players in your management ranks, and you need a plan to improve that if it needs to be improved. You need a plan to, get those positions filled with nearly all A players. Otherwise you're going to be working hard to hire A players, to work for those managers, those B and C managers, and they're just going to leave. They're going to leave, and you're going to have, even if you're hiring really well at the lower levels in the organization, it's not going to matter all that much because they're not going to stick around long. They're going to go find an A player to work.
Yeah. Yeah, there's nothing I have worked in organizations where I kind of would be potentially looking at my manager the next level up and going, "Yeesh," like that's not very either inspiring, or it's not how, I think it should be done, or kind of looking at it to be like, I don't really want to be led by this person. So I can understand what that feels like when if you have aspirations or something. So something to think about, when we're running our businesses, we're not always putting ourselves in the shoes of our employees and what it's like from their perspective to work in the company. And then we might even question, like, well, why are people leaving? And, maybe you're trying to figure it out, but you may not be realizing that it's actually the team that's affecting that person more than anything else. So I I'm curious if well, I'm curious about a lot of things. But I was wondering if you could kind of give us some of the big missteps that you see that organizations are doing right now when and you started where you told us about that statistic of only 25% of the companies most companies only hire 25% A players, I guess is the kind of depressing statistic. But also I could see how some people are thinking maybe A players are rare and maybe that's the best we can do. And so we just kind of, get what we can. But you guys go through in the book some very clear, challenges and things that businesses are not doing well in the hiring process. So I was wondering if you could walk us through some of those steps.
Sure. And the first I've mentioned already, and that's not having a job scorecard.
Yeah.
And whether you call it a job scorecard or not thinking through the results you need that person to deliver. So one, you can accurately measure their performance.
Hmm.
Two, so you can accurately communicate your expectations to them. And then do your performance management along the way. And not only that, we don't know necessarily exactly who we're looking for without that, without those results and those key competencies defined. The problem is our job descriptions, and we all either have or have seen job descriptions. I've had the opportunity to look at thousands of them, and not many of those thousands are very useful. One, you can't score them. Like there's just formatting wise, there's no place to make it to utilize it. Actually, it's just a big long Word document for the most part. A long list of responsibilities.
Yeah.
Responsible for managing 10 people. Yeah, and for me, I'm like, so what? Like, what do you need those? What do you need that group to do, or what are you responsible for? How is that role going to actually impact the organization? So that's the first. Think through that. You know, sit down by yourself. Even better if you sit down with a person or two on your team, and you talk about the results that need to be delivered that will define high performance in that. And then once you think through those results, you can think, all right, so where do they need to be really strong? Sort of what behaviors need to be really strong for them to drive those results and also to fit in our culture. And so a lot of the listeners have their core values defined. And so, everybody coming into the company needs to be at least okay in all of your core values, or you don't hire them, and for your leadership team, they probably need to be very good or excellent in all of those core values because they're really embodying them and role modeling them for the rest of the organization. So that's the number one problem. Having a job description that is multiple pages long, that's not scoreable and really isn't accurate. Yeah, just way too wordy. Here, and I'll make another connection here, and that is using that wordy vague job description as a job ad, that you post up on Indeed is another mistake. Yeah, especially when some of those bullet points are, needs to be able to sit for 8 hours a day. That's not a selling point for the job. That's something that is incredibly obvious, in most roles. If you're looking for a customer service agent, that's a sitting job. That's sitting in front of a computer, and so we don't need to lead with that. Maybe we're talking about at some point, but that's not something to lead with. Think about what you post on Indeed or you post on your careers page as your advertisement for the company and the job. You are selling your company, you're selling this job to that A player candidate. That's who you're think about. So, just as you do all of your other sales and marketing materials, use that same philosophy on your job ads.
Yeah.
Big, long, multiple sentence paragraphs do not belong on a job ad, certainly, and actually a job description, they shouldn't belong. So there, just do a quick search, great job ads, and you'll get examples of great job ads. Some are a little off the wall creative, maybe a little
Yeah.
bit too creative for many of us. But you'll also get to, articles on Indeed on how to write great job ads. Like, don't have them more than 500 words long. 500 words is the maximum. If you have paragraphs should not be more than 2 sentences long. It's really hard to read. It's easier to read. They've got tips on bullet points in there as well. So just follow that advice. I mean, really follow that advice and think about, like sales. You are trying to get those great people to upload their resume so you can potentially talk with them.
Mm.
So that's a number one. Know who we're looking for, and think about how you are portraying the company in that first impression to potential candidates.
I like that like marketing approach too. I mean, remember, we're always marketing our businesses both to clients but also to people who want to come and work with us. And I think some of the best people are probably employed somewhere. I think,
Yes.
I mean, doesn't mean that we don't have people who are kind of in job transitions or still looking for the right fit and whatnot. But, to be kind of attractive to a potential candidate is important. So, being out there, I mean, some of our best employees have actually come because, they saw something of what we were doing on LinkedIn, and it wasn't actually that necessarily responding to a job. It was kind of just more that sort of that waft of scent of like, oh, what's happening over there? I'm very curious about it. So I like that approach. And one of the things that you also talk about is getting enough candidates into the pool. And then a lot of times people aren't getting enough people even just to even start the hiring process. So can you explain that a little bit, and how do we know when we have enough?
Well, and think about, like, A players are the top 10% of talent. And I know this is not going to be perfect statistics by any stretch, but if you only have 5 applicants,
Ah,
the probability of having an A player in just 5, because you're looking for the top 10%, is relatively low. And so even if you have 10, there might just be one A player in there, again, if you're lucky. So, we say, and again, this is when you're posting jobs. If that is the main way you are connecting with applicants, you should do what you need to do to get at least 30 people into your candidate.
okay.
So having at least 30 applicants in the pool really increases the probability that at least one of them will be an A player. Another thing to think about too, just in terms of the 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 pool of A players, though that full pool, think of anyone who would be available and in the top 10% of talent for that job. Hannah, you said it a little while ago. Many of those people are currently employed. And many of them are successful and happy where they are today, and they are not out looking for your job ad on Indeed. So when you're posting those job ads, you're only getting potentially connected with a small percentage of your total applicant pool who would actually
Mm.
be interested in talking about that job. And so, yeah, at least 30, when you're posting job ads. Now, that's a little bit different when we're talking about getting referrals from A players. So, asking the A players, asking the A players on your team who they know that may fit this role, who would have the potential to fit this role. It's better if you have a job scorecard you can share with them, so you can say, here's exactly who we're looking for, so they can help do some screening. There, we could go the complete other direction, where you just need a referral to one A player. You only need one A player in your candidate pool to hire an A player. So that's a different, kind of a different way to look at it.
Right.
By getting the referral from someone you really respect, you're pre-screening. They're doing some pre-screening for you. So kind of either direction. I know most of the listeners though are using job ads, and if you only have 5, not 100% chance, but really close to that you're going to have a mishire, because you probably don't have an A player in that pool. And what you're going to do is you're going to hire the person who you think is best out of that pool of 5.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's what tends to happen. What if all 5 are C players? Like, you have a 0%, like, there's no chance. It doesn't matter how good you are at interviewing and everything else, you still don't have an A player to identify. So pretty important to have a big enough pool to pick from.
Absolutely. I've been in that situation on the hiring side where you're like, well, none of these are very attractive, and you kind of have to throw them all out and start over. Um, with the job scorecard, does that get shared with the candidate, or is that just things that you're asking questions to and holding on your side?
Yeah,
Do they get to see it?
eventually. Yeah,
Hmm.
eventually we do. And we recommend toward the end of the hiring process, maybe even right before they sign the offer, you can show them and say, hey, here's what we're going to expect. This is literally what you're going to be signing up for. Now, A-player candidates should be asking those questions along the way, and very often will, like exactly what will I be accountable for, and such. And so you're going to probably be talking about those things that are on the job scorecard. But many job scorecards also contain some proprietary information like revenue numbers and maybe even EBITDA
Ah,
numbers and whatnot that you probably won't share until you're confident the person is going to join.
okay. Let's talk a little bit. This is a financial podcast at the end of the day, and yes, people are very, very important to our revenue and our profits. I would love to have a quick chat about the cost of mishiring
Yeah,
because I think it's very hard to identify hard costs for people, but when we hire the wrong person, it has a huge financial impact. Oftentimes, we talk a lot about labor efficiency here at in Claire CFO, which is kind of a concept that comes from the Simple Numbers book that I mentioned earlier. But when our team is not efficient, they're not doing well, they're not producing the revenue they should be doing, or they're not affecting the revenue that we'd like to see. That's one thing. But it's sort of this hard, um, maybe like difficult number to sort of identify. So when we have the wrong person, what are some of the things that you guys consider when we're trying to identify that cost of a mishire?
sure. And so, when we're thinking about hard costs, there's been a bunch of research done on the cost to fill an open seat. This does not considering mistakes the person made or opportunities they missed. This is just how much does it cost the company to fill an open seat? And it hovers right around 20% of that person's annual compensation.
Hmm.
So you want a hard cost. Like there's plenty of research out there. If you're paying somebody $100,000, it will cost you $20,000 to replace that person. So that's a relatively hard cost. Another hard cost is what you pay them and the benefits. That's a hard cost.
Mm-hmm.
And if you pay a severance, another hard cost. Uh, and if there are any certifications you pay for and whatnot, that we think about that as maintenance. Those are the hard costs that we can pretty quickly figure out. The cost to hire the person. Now, if you use a recruiting firm of some kind, if you pay someone, add that to the 20%. So that's on top of the 20%.
Yeah.
The cost of the hire. Those are the hard costs. And then, what you were talking about, the difference or the performance differential between an A player and a non-A player. There's a good chance that in a role, you've worked with some A players and you worked with some non-A's, maybe even some C players. So think about them. I mean, take a person who was an A player and take a person who was a C player and work really hard to quantify the difference in performance. And so then you add that to your costs, and we call it the cost of mistakes and missed and wasted business opportunities.
Mm.
And the sixth cost that we talk about is disruption. And that one's tough. That one's tough. A manager who causes low morale on her team, how much does that cost the organization? Now, remember though, A players don't want to work for non-A's. And especially for a management role, if you fill a position with, let's go extreme, a C player manager, and they inherit 4 A players and a B player, one or two of those A players probably left during their tenure. And if they were replaced, we also find that especially C player managers tend not to hire A's. Maybe even purposefully not hire
Yeah.
A's because they're threatening. They're like, why would
Yeah.
I hire somebody who could maybe take my job? And so the 2A players, let's just say 2A players leave, they're probably replaced with maybe a B and a C. And so there again, you have another performance or results differential that you could factor in the disruption. So you
Yeah.
can get deep on this. You spend a half hour with another team member, another member of your team or two, and you talk through those 6 categories. And you tend to come up with a pretty big number.
Yeah, it's usually a multiple of a salary,
Yes.
when you really start expanding out and the higher up in the organization, the more impact that person could be having. I think there was an example of like a CEO in the book that the multiplier was like 27 times their annual salary or something like
Yes.
that. But then when you really think about it, it could be even bigger than that when, if you're leading a large team. And especially if you're affecting the whole strategic direction of a company, that can have many, many multiplier impacts. So, um, I I think you guys have some types of calculators, don't you, on your website
We
for
do. On our
tracking that?
website, we have a cost of mishire calculator. And I think you could also put cost of mishire calculator. Just search that. Just go into Google and search that. And our page will be one of the top there. But if you go to topgrading.com and over on the right side, click on resources, it's in that menu. It's in the resources menu.
Fantastic. Um, I want to make sure to I've got this on the YouTube channel. So if anybody is watching the video, this is Foolproof Hiring. I was very encouraged that this was an easy read. I am not a great reader, and I have picked up Top Grading before, and it is a hefty, and there's been multiple volumes or multiple publications of Top Grading, and it is much more in depth, very hefty book. I was very happy to know how easy this was to read and get some of the higher concepts. So anybody who's listening, definitely go and check out Foolproof Hiring. I know that we're going to have to wrap up here in a second. Before we do that, I wanted to ask you a question, but before we do that, the website, if you're looking for any of these resources, and also if you want to find the Talent Wins podcast, which Chris hosts, you can go and check that out. That's at topgrading.com. But my last question for you, Chris, is what is your favorite book? And this can be business or personal development, and why?
Good. And Hannah, as I tell my daughters when they ask me which one is my favorite, like, all right, you're both my favorites. And so I do have a big list of favorites, but I'm going to keep on the theme. And this is certainly one of my favorites and was impactful to me. And that is Who, Not How by Dan Sullivan and Ben Hardy. And the theme is that we're all good at things, but we're all not, we're few of us, if any, are good at everything. And so, especially as entrepreneurs, we try to do everything, because we feel as though we need to. And at best, we're just okay, at a lot of different things, even what we're really good at, because
Mhm.
we're spending time on it. And so the concept is hire people who are great at the things you are not great at. I mean, it sounds very simple, but do that sooner rather than later.
Mm.
And there are multiple examples in the book of, people, even when they didn't think they could do it, or they could afford, they would hire someone to do that, whatever it was for them, what they didn't like to do, what they weren't really good at. It gave that person the time, usually the entrepreneur, the time to really focus on what they were good at and what has the most impact on the business.
Mm.
And so, like, I strongly recommend anyone who is managing people anyway, from owner or CEO to manager of individual contributors, grab the book. It's really, really good. And if you follow their advice, it should almost certainly accelerate your growth.
Yeah. That's good for me to hear because I limit the business sometimes with just thinking, I don't want to do that thing.
Mhm.
I don't, if it's, maybe a marketing tactic or maybe it's a new service line in the business. Like we have one we're contemplating right now. And I've said 1,000 times, I don't want to do it. I don't want to do it. I don't want to do it. But I know strategically it makes sense for the business to get involved in that. So that's a good thing. I will definitely go and check out that book. And I'm sure our listeners will as well.
And Hannah, I'm going to actually throw one more in there.
Yeah, let's do it.
That's really connected, and it's The Working Genius.
Oh, yeah.
I know
I read
Working
that.
Genius is in the title. Six Working Geniuses or Working
Mhm.
Genius by Pat Lencioni. And really, they're very complementary. and really, really go together. And also quite connected with Jim Collins. I mean, and also our philosophy of getting the right person in the right seat.
Yeah.
Because most I'm going to venture, go extreme here and say most of you have somebody who is a great culture fit. You want them around you, like we want them on the team, but they're not delivering the results that you need them to deliver.
Mhm.
It's very possible they are in the wrong seat.
Yeah.
And so that working genius will really help you think about who should be in what kinds of seats and what you should expect from people. Should you expect a wanderer to deliver the day-to-day results and get into the details? That could be an unrealistic expectation, and vice versa. So those are two that if you want to do a better job with your talent, in addition to Foolproof Hiring, grab those two books. They should really, really help some light bulbs go on.
Yeah, I like that because if you have somebody that you've already invested in and they like the company and, maybe just a tweak of their job role or moving them into a different department or giving them different responsibilities can help them flourish and kind of help the whole company. So I love that. So Chris, besides the website, is there anywhere else or that you would like to point people to where they can either learn about top grading or get connected with you?
No, actually, Hannah, topgrading.com really has, I'll say topgrading.com and Foolproof Hiring. Those
Okay.
are, really, again, complementary. And, and we've got, of course, info@topgrading.com and our main number. If you want to chat, just give us a call or shoot us an email. And, because these things are easy to understand kind of in concept. Usually much more challenging to execute.
Oh,
So
yes.
that's what we're in the business of, is helping our clients execute these concepts.
Absolutely. Well, and we'll make sure to put all those links and everything in the show notes so people can go and check those out. Or if you're on YouTube, you can check them out in the description box. So, well, Chris, thank you so much for being here today.
It was my pleasure. Thanks, Hannah.
Thanks for listening to the Financial Clarity Podcast. Be sure to check out the show notes to learn more about today's episode and click subscribe on your favorite podcast app.